Come on, muted.
All right, I'm gonna fix my breakfast. Get my meeting here.
Good morning, everyone.
Morning, Chair. Thanks for chairing today.
Yeah, I was having a hard time getting on. It took 3 tries.
I think Director Busek is still having trouble getting on.
Okay, we'll give everybody a couple more minutes.
I'll go down and see if I can do my tech magic here. You've got about 47 people on now, Chair, and
All right, let's go ahead and start. If anybody else has issues, we'll just catch them up, or they can catch up when they get in. So good morning, everyone. Let's go ahead and start the meeting. So we'll look at approval of the July 29th meeting minutes. Can I get a motion to approve, or if there's any questions?
we need to amend the minutes to reflect that Phil Greenwald from Longmont was participating as well. We didn't capture that in the minutes, so a motion would be to approve with revisions or a revised approval, amended approval.
All right, can we get a motion to amend that motion and approve?
So moved with amendments. This is Julie.
Second, this is Joan.
All right, we have a motion and a second. Any questions? I don't see any hands, so we'll go ahead and approve that. Let's go ahead and move on to the revised mission statement and shared values. I know we had a pretty good conversation about this at another meeting, and we were able to capture those few comments that we wanted to add in there. And so if everybody wants to just take a quick look at this, any other questions or comments or thoughts? Otherwise, I think Carson did a really good job of capturing everyone's ideas and thoughts, and make sure that we put in there what we were hoping to see.
We did send this out to everyone in their packet with the minutes. Hopefully, you've had a chance to look at that, and the approval today will then mean that we'll put that on the website, make a change to the website, and then we'll update our leave behind with this language instead of the current language.
And I see Julie's hand up.
Yeah, I just wanted to say that I think this looks fantastic. I really appreciate everybody who contributed and worked on this, and thank you, Carson, for going back and making additional edits again and again. So I think we ended up with a great product. Thanks.
Thank you, Julie. Any other questions or comments? I do not see any other hands, so if we can get a motion to approve.
So moved. This is Julie.
Second, this is Joan.
Thank you. We have a motion and a second. Any comments or questions? I do not see any hands, so we'll go ahead and move forward with that. All right, next up, we have the RTD Director's Reports. I don't know if Vince was able to get on. I can't see everybody on the list. Let me look through here. Yep, I see him.
I'm here.
Good morning, Vince. Would you like to
Hi.
go first?
Yeah, sure. I'll go first. I'll start with the N-line operations. I know some of you noticed there were some problems down at Union Station with electrification that affected all of the commuter lines for a couple of days in this past weekend. I believe those are either resolved or well on their way to being resolved. And notwithstanding that, ridership on the N-line continues to grow. I think I've mentioned this before. We started at a low of just in the 20s of thousands per month, and now we're over 60,000 a month ridership. A couple other things I think are important to note, and RTD has often been criticized as being kind of insular and not paying attention to stakeholders and all that. And I hope at least the directors here on this meeting have proven to you that we're more than willing to listen. But as far as our general manager goes, I have to hand it to her. We've changed our performance evaluation metrics for her dramatically over what's been done in the past. In fact, part of the metric now includes what the community thinks of RTD and how we score that, and how the general manager, CEO Johnson, improves on that. So I think that's a big deal in a lot of ways, because if we can reach out to the community, if we can touch the community, and we can get people feeling better about RTD, that means we've got to be doing things right internally and externally. So a big change in that performance measurement and metric, and I'm looking forward to see seeing how that shakes out and how our general manager does, and I'm sure she'll do just fine. So that's all I have right now. I'll pass it off, I think, to Director Whitmore.
Good morning, everybody. So one of the items on the agenda is a request for a brief accountability committee report. And we'll be happy to visit a little bit about that. I'm going to hand it over to our general manager here in a moment because it's not easy for me to be brief, and it certainly is a gift that she has and still be on target with data that you need. So just a warning, Deborah, it's headed your way here in a few minutes, but I did want to make note of a couple things regarding the AC. Our deadline to reply to the recommendations is September 3rd. And on Tuesday, we officially adopted our answers. There's a very lengthy report in regard to our analysis and what we think we can do in response to those recommendations. And our staff worked very quickly and diligently after the report was given to us from the accountability committee to turn that around in a 45-day period, and we've beaten the deadline, it appears, and I'm very appreciative because it was a lot of work worth doing. Julie, especially, I want you to hear that. Before I ask Deborah to kind of go through kind of the 9 categories, the way she had summarized with the help of senior staff, I just wanted to give a shout out to the DRCOG staff. This event was foisted upon them, and they did a great job in organizing and working through about a years-long process, followed up by a lot of hard work by the staff and all the board members to review the input that we got from the committee. So tremendous amount of work, but a good self-analysis once again for us. So with that, to summarize, I think it would be very helpful to us all to kick it over to Deborah. And I think Eric Davidson's on the call if he has any comments, or Vince or anybody else. So Deborah, please rescue me. Thank you.
So good morning, Madam Chair, everyone assembled this morning, and to all the RTD directors, thank you so much. It's my pleasure to be before you this morning, and to the points that Director Whitmore touched upon. First, I would be remiss not thanking the Accountability Committee for their diligence and their hard work. Moreover, DRCOG staff, and most importantly, members that comprise my team as well, for working effortlessly to work in tandem to bring this to fruition. To the points that Director Whitmore made, last evening, we transmitted to DRCOG the board approved responses to the recommendations set forward in the accountability report upon which we received on July 20th. In doing so, to the point that was raised regarding the 9 categories, I think it's paramount to point out that the categories comprised of federal COVID-19 relief funds to rebuild ridership and improve operations, improve operator retention, develop sub-regional service councils, explore board structure modifications subject to additional study and input, explore fast tracks options, improve reporting metrics and transparency, approve fixed route and paratransit service provision, and leverage partnerships for resources and services. So with those headings, the Accountability Committee made more than 40 recommendations for the betterment of RTD's operational efficiency, and the agency agreed overwhelmingly with the vast majority of these recommendations. The single recommendation upon which there was not alignment centered upon the consolidation of discounted fares to cover equity populations. As you guys have heard and know very well, that RTD is currently conducting the system-wide fare study and equity analysis. So with that, the Accountability Committee and RTD are aligned on many of the same issues. We here at RTD, and I'm speaking for myself as well as my team, and I know the board aligns around this as well, welcomes the opportunity to continue to convene, collaborate, and partner with the community, customers, regional stakeholders, the legislature, and the governor's office. One thing that is important that I'd like to note is we talk about the sub-regional service councils, recognizing the recommendation that was put forward by the Accountability Committee is to convene a working group to discern what might be best relative to those sub-regional service councils. Are they going to align around travel sheds, or will they be encompassed within county boundaries? And that's something the working group will help formalize a decision on as we go forward. Once again, as it relates to exploring fast track options, recognizing the board did adopt to move forward relative to doing a study to agree upon a common set of facts. It's important to note with the accountability recommendations that the board aligned on exploring all the unfinished projects within the fast tracks program. Relating to improving reporting metrics and transparency, Director Busick made note of performance metrics relative to me as the CEO, but it's imperative to qualify that in the sense that with the board adopted strategic plan in which we have 4 strategic priorities, i.e. being community value, customer excellence, employee ownership, and financial success, that there is a myriad of tactics in that metrics as well that will enable us to achieve success outcomes. And when we talk about improving and reporting metrics and transparency going forward, commencing in 2022, we will have a manner in which we will bring that forward in a very transparent fashion, reporting out what it is that we learn through our metrics and enable us to become best in class. And also, as we talk about leveraging partnerships for resources and services, being here in this forum as well, recognizing that we cannot provide public transit in a vacuum, it's important that we basically leverage partnerships for the betterment of the region. And then in reference to other options, recognizing that we are in a containment area, we can look at what's happening around the country relative to the shift in climate, exploring options to leverage spare the air days, which is permissible under the Federal Transit Administration guidelines. And that's something we'll be exploring going forward. So with that, I thank you for the opportunity to present this summarized version of the work that has been done. And I thank you for the opportunity to present this morning.
Thank you, Deborah. Eric, do you have anything you would like to add? And then obviously if there's some questions on any of the comments, we'd be happy to visit with you.
Yeah, thanks Troy, and thanks Vince, and Deborah, thanks for providing the update to everybody. The only thing I'll add, first of all, good morning everybody. I'll just add that something Deborah just briefly touched on, which was this past board meeting on Tuesday evening this week, the board of directors did pass approval to move forward with an $8 million study to study the costs of a peak service plan, 3 trains in the morning, 3 in the evening for completing the B line or the Northwest Rail. This study will include a couple of things, including viable vehicle technologies, fleet and infrastructure, lifestyle costing, risk mitigation strategies, operational rights within BNSF. There will be a look at the ridership numbers, which will include a lot of community outreach. The immediate next step is to finalize a scope of work for a planning and environmental linkages study, PEL study. The plan is to pull money from the Fast Tracks Internal Savings Account, or FISA, to complete this study. There is the possibility of supplementing that with a raise grant. This, to be clear, we're definitely not able to move forward on actually completing the peak service plan. I think we all are well aware of that, but this will give us a much better understanding of the cost, which really should give us a floor for the lowest cost option for completing the Northwest Rail. I think it's also important to point out that the board did just approve a cooperation agreement with between RTD, CDOT, and the Front Range Passenger Rail and Southwest Chief. And this is one of the first steps in that, is that we'll be looking at this peak service plan there is some alignment between what it would cost us operationally on peak service and how we might operate on a theoretical front range passenger rail, should that be on the B line and should that at some point come to fruition. So that's another update for y'all this morning, and thanks as always for having us.
Madam Chair, if I can just make one point of clarification to a statement that Director Davidson made. Everything he said is spot on, but the one caveat is that we will not be conducting a planning environmental linkages study. That's something that typically happens within the auspices of the Federal Highway Administration. Our study will not involve those various elements, but collectively we will be doing a study as he outlined, recognizing the common set of facts, what it may look like as it relates to peak rail service and different operational aspects that will enable us to garner a better understanding working with the BNSF. So with that, thank you very much for the opportunity to clarify.
Thank you,
This is why we
Deborah.
have our CEO and General Manager, Deborah Johnson. Thank you for clarifying and bailing me out there. I appreciate that. Thank you.
Madam Chair, if I could interject real quickly, two things. I know Shelley Cook, Director Cook is on the line, so she may have some additions. And then I want to make one real quick statement and introduction after we give Shelley the floor, if that's okay.
Yeah, go for it.
I have nothing to add. Really great reports. I was going to make the same clarification about the PEL. So thank you, CEO Johnson, for that.
All right, thank you, Shelley. I think we'd be remiss if we just didn't highlight, we have a number of other RTD staff members on the call, and the one I wanted to make sure we introduce because he's gotten very involved lately in some local government issues is Michael Davies, our governmental relations person. So I appreciate Michael's rolling up his sleeves to help with a number of items. He's swamped with federal legislative matters, as you might imagine, but he's jumped in on some work with Adams County and Brighton on the bus stop at the Justice Center. And I did want to announce that, you know, contrary to maybe popular belief, if you haven't heard anything about that, that work is ongoing to rectify that situation. And Michael and Deborah are very involved with Ray and officials from Brighton. So Deborah, if there's anything you could add about process on that, I think would be helpful. I'm sure Jessica and Greg and a number of other people are interested.
Yes, so thank you very much, Director Whitmore. And thank you for acknowledging the other members of the team that are present. Just to qualify the activity since we last convened in July, when the conversation ensued relative to the deactivation of the stop that's adjacent to the Adams County Justice Center. I had been engaged with the entities of which Director Whitmore described, i.e. Adams County, as well as City of Brighton, went out and visited the stop personally so I could acclimate myself to the proximity of the stop to the Justice Center in both directions, both eastbound and westbound. Since that time, we have convened and had a study session with the Adams County Commissioners. In doing so, further had discussions and had a subsequent meeting with a myriad of individuals representing both the City of Brighton as well as Adams County. What spawned from that is a collective understanding that we would be working in an amicable fashion to come up with a short-term solution while we look at a more permanent solution, recognizing some operational challenges relative to adhering to safety as prescribed by the Federal Transit Administration, as well as the National Transit Institute. So with that, just Monday explored some options. I know Adams County staff convened and met with Brighton, or will be meeting with Brighton. There's a subsequent meeting on Monday. I don't want to get ahead of myself as I will be briefed on what has transpired there, but ultimately what we're looking to do is effectuate a short-term solution with the immediate solution following suit, which should be done within a short order. And we will be keeping all apprised as we shore that up relatively soon, I would say, probably within the next week or two. So with that, I will yield the floor back to you, Madam Chair. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I appreciate all the time you've devoted to us. I will go back to mute where I belong.
Thanks. And thank you for the updates on that. I know that's been a really contentious item. I see Anita's got her hand up, and I didn't know if Lynn wanted to add anything from the commissioner's perspective. Anita, go ahead.
Well, is it more appropriate to let Lynn jump in first? I apologize for my eagerness.
No problem. I didn't know if Lynn had anything to add or not, so.
Good morning. I think that it has been summarized accurately, both by Deborah. Thank you, Deborah, for working with us. Brighton and Adams County, we're all at the table to solve this. And so just appreciate the collaboration and the communication between the three agencies. So I don't have anything additional to add.
Thank you, Lynn.
All
Anita,
right.
go ahead.
I apologize, but I'd like to backtrack to the accountability recommendations. And before I do that, I just want to say thank you to Ms. Johnson and to all of the directors for coming to these meetings and being so easy to communicate with and really hearing from us and sharing with us. I'm particularly happy about the recommendation for the peak rail study. Service study. So I appreciate that. But I do have a point of question to help with clarification on the fares recommendation. Reading the Denver Post article, it made it sound as though RTD almost rejected that recommendation or was cautious, didn't think that deep fare discounts were the answer. And what I'm hearing from you and what I believe to be the case is rather you want that to be evaluated in the full process. Is that, which is almost, that's required. Is that correct? That it's not that you're rejecting a deep fare discount, but rather just going through the process that's already started?
Madam Chair, if I may, this is Deborah Johnson. Yes, you're absolutely right in relationship to what it is that we're doing. We recognize that the fares are cumbersome. We recognize, and I specifically understand, more than most relative to the fares that we have. They're some of the most expensive ones in the country. And doing so, to do something of that caliber relative to a discount, we do have to look at the fares in a holistic fashion. And outside of that, and I know I've talked about this several times, within the parameters of being a recipient of federal dollars, in order to alter the fares, we do have to adhere to a fair equity analysis. And the only way in which we could do that is to complete an analysis. If we weren't to do that, then there could be fares for a limited amount of time that generally isn't prescribed as it is in the circular as being promotional. So yes, you're absolutely right. The non-alignment around that recommendation was the recommendation to do it right now, and we have to do our due diligence in being in compliance with the Civil Rights Act and Title VI, specifically recognizing fair equity service and analyses.
Thank you, and I'll be happy to help be the messenger on that. And I think the article somewhat did a disservice because it did make it appear, in my opinion, it did make it appear that it was more a rejection of the recommendation rather than a required process to go through to be in compliance. The next question of clarification, and Eric, I believe you touched on this, is during this peak service study, one of the variables that you'll be looking at is if Front Range Rail is to come to fruition and if the Northwest Corridor is the approved routes, looking for opportunities for synergy on that, or how that would impact this study, how we could work in tandem with it. And I just want to hear verification that that's part of this study.
Yeah, Madam Chair, this is Eric Davidson. I actually would love to defer to Ms. Johnson, and I believe Henry Stoppelkamp joined us as well to clarify this. Actually, yes, Deborah Johnson, if you wouldn't mind jumping in to clarify this, there is some subtlety to this. There
is, so thank you very much, Director Davidson. And to clarify the question, there was reference made to a cooperative agreement in which RTD, CDOT, and the Front Range Passenger Rail Commission is entering into. And I could say on behalf of the agency, I just signed that yesterday. And what that means is that we will work in tandem, recognizing that there is a current alignment as relates to the Northwest Passenger Rail, recognizing that there needs to be work done by a third-party entity that wouldn't be RTD relative to doing environmental analyses and discerning what that alignment is. RTD stands ready to work in collaboration to ensure that there is synergy, because we operate from the vantage point. It's quite rewarding for the region as a whole when we have a comprehensive transportation network, and we see it as being complementary, not as being competing. So if you need further clarity on that, please let me know. But basically, that's where we are relative to what we're doing here.
Already?
Create that communication and subtlety.
Saying nice things.
Thank you.
Thank you. And I'm going to just ask everyone, if you're not speaking, to go ahead and put your microphones on mute. We're getting some feedback. I think some of the call-in, we just have a couple. Perfect. Thank you. All right. Any other questions? I think it's helpful to hear, where we are with all of this. So I appreciate Deborah's coming on to these meetings every month and giving us the information. And I really appreciate that you've gone out to all of these areas as well when we do have an issue. And so it does show your commitment to really addressing the problems that we have. So I appreciate that. Any other questions for RTD, or anybody else from RTD wanted to chime in on anything? I did see Henry on there, but maybe everything has been answered. All right, I don't see any other hands, so thank you very much. Let's go ahead and keep moving on. So we've got the
Chair, can I interrupt a second and say, before we go to the C.GHG, which is a longer presentation, Andres Carrara from Senator Hickenlooper's office has just texted me and said he would be happy to give a quick brief on the infrastructure bill if we're interested in hearing that. And I think that would be a good inclusion to today's agenda if you're okay with that. And we'll just defer to Andrea first and then go to GHG.
Yeah, that's perfect. Thanks so much for being here, Andreas. Let's go ahead and hear that presentation.
Thank you so much, Commissioner Stewart. Good morning, everybody. My name is Andres Carrera. I serve as Denver Metro Regional Director for Senator Hickenlooper. I just wanted to report out a couple of key updates from the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, that includes several provisions authored by your senator. Chief among them, Hickenlooper's provision would return RTT's deposit on their Union Station loan. Of course, we all know about this one. That would require the Department of Transportation to quickly return the $28.9 million that that belongs to RTD, plus interest for a deposit that RTD made on a federal loan related to Denver's Union Station. So we're very happy to deliver that for Colorado. Hickenlooper was also in, the brains behind what's called the Recharge Act, which is a bill that would make it more affordable to drive an electric vehicle by having states review their utility rates for EV charging. So it's a bit of a weedsy bill, but we're very excited. The boss is, laser focused on ensuring that we transition from fossil fuels to something more sustainable. I remember an earlier NATA call, where sustainability was one of those top priorities for this group. So I'm very glad that Hickenlooper would, the senator was able to deliver on this. Still on the subject of transportation, he wanted to implement a national standard to prevent marijuana impaired driving. I know that matters to a lot of folks here. Hickenlooper's amendment, requires the federal government to recommend ways for researchers to access marijuana samples and study how marijuana impairs driving. Certainly something that's important to the state of Colorado. There's also $65 billion in there to ensure every American has high-speed internet, but more and that was a huge priority for the senator. More specifically for transportation, there's $110 billion there for roads and bridges, which would help repair 481 Colorado bridges and over 3,600 miles of Colorado highway in poor condition. There's also $25 billion for airport improvements. Of course, a huge deal to folks over at DEN. There's also $39 billion to modernize public transit and $66 billion for passenger and freight rail investments, including $16 billion for Amtrak. I know that rail was a huge priority to this group as well. So again, very excited that we were able to hit on that. Sustainability was also one of those NATA priorities, and so I'm proud to report out that the bill includes $7.5 billion for the first ever federal investment in a national charging network for vehicles. So the idea is you can go from Fort Collins to Pueblo without any range anxiety and visit all of the beautiful sites that this state has to offer. Without ever having to be concerned about, whether your Nissan Leaf can get there. Finally, we also fought for $2.5 billion for zero emission buses. Truthfully, we're disappointed in that number. $2.5 billion might sound like a lot, but we were actually going for $7.5 billion. Of course, this group knows more than any other group, that everything is a negotiation in Congress. And so then we're going to keep pushing, our folks, our partners in the Senate on this one. But again, we're happy to get at least something on that, $2.5 billion for zero emission buses. And so then wanted to report out all of these good news. The Senate is expected to vote on this package in middle of September to late September. So there's two things going on. There's the $3.5 trillion package, and then there's the $550 billion dollar infrastructure deal. So anyway, I just wanted to report out these things because I haven't had an opportunity since the last time NATA convened. So again, Commissioner Stewart, certainly do appreciate the opportunity to report out these great things. I'll also drop these points in the chat so that nobody has to write anything down.
And I see, Rebecca, did you unmute yourself to chime in? Okay.
No, although I'm delighted to hear this.
And then I do want to also mention that Jeremy Rodriguez is on the phone as well from Perlmutter's office. I didn't know if you had anything to add to that, Jeremy, or. Let's see. Okay, there we go. I see him.
Sorry about that. I think he covered everything pretty well. I don't think I have anything to add. Sorry about that.
Oh, no, thanks so much, Jeremy. Thanks for being here. All right, well, we always appreciate the updates and look forward to some of that maybe coming our way. So with that, we'll go ahead and move on to the CDOT GHG rulemaking presentation with Rebecca.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Good morning, everyone. Makes my CDOT heart happy to start the day hearing about transportation funding and the potential for more. But today's focus that I'll walk you through is to cover a proposed rulemaking we have out there now to address another important issue, which is greenhouse gas emissions and the role of transportation in those in the state. And I do want to thank the chair and the rest of NATA. I know we had tried to cover this topic at the last meeting and ran out of time. So I do appreciate you making an opportunity on the agenda today. So Carson or whomever's driving, if you want to advance to the next slide. So just a bit of background, although I think this group is pretty familiar where this whole concept for this rule came from. But of course, this work really started in earnest with the passage of House Bill 1261 in 2019, which set those pretty aggressive statewide greenhouse gas reduction targets for every sector of the economy. That was followed about a year and a half later with the publication of the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Roadmap, which identified recommended policy measures, again, across every sector to try to reach those statewide greenhouse gas goals. This roadmap also was sort of the first, I would say, kind of policy statement that acknowledged that transportation had eclipsed electricity as the primary source of greenhouse gas emissions in Colorado. And that is primarily because of the changes in power plants and the source of those, the transition to natural gas and other renewable sources, sort of moved transportation to the forefront. Not long after, we had House Bill 260, which was really significant for the state, of course, in that it raised transportation revenues. However, what Senate Bill 260 also did is said, CDOT go forward and implement rules and guidelines that will address the role that transportation planning and the decisions we make when we adopt plans how we can focus on plans and reduce greenhouse gas emissions. So it sort of looked back at the policy recommendation in the roadmap and required us to move forward. It also stipulated that for CDOT and for DRCOG and the North Front Range MPO, we were to update our plans by October of 2022 to be in compliance with these new rules. So not only set a requirement, it set a time frame, at least for the MPOs in the ozone non-attainment area. So for the last about 7 months, CDOT's been working quite hard on developing the draft rulemaking that I'll run you through. And I do want to acknowledge that the MPOs have been at the table with us from day one and have spent hours and hours giving us their input and expertise. We are partners in planning in Colorado between the MPOs and CDOT. We both have a federal and state obligation and a sort of primacy in that space. So having the MPOs join us and give us a good input on this has really been instrumental. So the rulemaking itself, this is a proposed rule which follows the Administrative Procedures Act. It is housed within an existing set of rules we have. So we're essentially amending current rules. So for a long time, CDOT has had a set of rules governing statewide transportation planning. It's a pretty complicated process, as you all know. So these rules were already pretty lengthy, and we have added quite a bit to them to include the greenhouse gas requirements. If you were to read the rule, which the draft is available on the CDOT website, I've got a link in this presentation, but I would point you to a few things. The preamble, or also known as the Statement of Basis and Purpose, is really our opportunity to state in plain English what the intent of this rule is, where it came from, what it seeks to achieve. So this is the section where we sort of relate back to House Bill 1261, the roadmap, talk about the role of the Transportation Commission. They are the ones at CDOT who actually decide to formally adopt rules, and they also oversee our planning process. So the preamble is a pretty important part in the draft rule. We also added a number of definitions, which are key because they're referred to quite a bit. And then the rulemaking itself, focusing on greenhouse gases, is in Section 8. All right, so I'll walk you through this pretty quickly. I don't want to use up a lot of time, although this is a very complicated rule. If you could go the next slide. Okay, so the basic construct here is that the rule itself applies to CDOT and all 5 metropolitan planning organizations. Again, that's because these are the bodies within Colorado that do transportation planning. We do recognize in the rule that not all MPOs are sort of at the same place in terms of their ability to do the modeling work, but also that because of the long experience that DRCOG and North Front Range have in ozone, they've built the teams to do that. And you also see some of the earlier co-benefits by addressing greenhouse gases sort of first in the Front Range. So for that reason, we provide a bit more time for the 3 more rural MPOs to come into this rule, and that's Grand Valley, Pueblo, and Pikes Peak in Colorado Springs. The whole premise of this rule, it's based on transportation modeling. So we take all the projects within a plan that are identified. If you take, for instance, CDOT's 10-year plan, that is several hundred projects. We run the regionally significant projects within that plan. So think of the projects that really fundamentally change our transportation system and how people move, widening highways, interchanges, things that really can influence driving. We run all those projects through a pretty complicated statewide travel model that predicts all the traffic that will flow on the roads over the next 30 years as a result of those projects. And compare that, and then that results in vehicle miles traveled, which is then translated into greenhouse gas emissions. It is a complicated process. However, again, this is pretty much the exact same work we do to determine if we're meeting our ozone obligations for transportation. So it's kind of a well-known approach to trying to get at those set of decisions we make that influence how people later drive. Because You know, as we all know, what we build matters, and providing more choice and you know, transit and bike and all that can influence how people get around the state. It's the rule sets specific greenhouse gas reduction levels, and they're specific to every MPO. And then CDOT's main obligation covers the non-MPO areas. And there's a lot of reasons for that. Primarily, it's because there's so much overlap between the projects that CDOT puts in our plan in the MPO area, and those same projects appear in the MPO plan. So we had to sort of detangle that a bit. If the reduction levels can't be met, there's a number of clauses in there as sort of alternative compliance. The main option is to use greenhouse gas mitigation measures. So essentially a commitment to do other things, invest in more transit, more biking, options like that. And then a big part of the compliance is just set around providing information to the Transportation Commission through a report. So the next slide, if you could go to that, Carson, is just a ton of numbers, and I recognize that, but I just wanted to give a preview of what, when we talk about setting greenhouse gas reduction levels, kind of what that looks like. So you can see we've got baselines numbers for each of the years in this rule, and then set reduction levels against those baselines again for each year. And what I might point your eye to is that total column. So if you look at those numbers, 0.5, 1.5, 1.2, and 0.7, thank you, Carson. Those are the total million metric tons that we are seeking to achieve statewide from this rulemaking. I'll give you some context for these. So that 2030 number of 1.5, the best way to, I think, to compare what that would achieve is to look back at the greenhouse gas roadmap and the amount of emissions we were seeking to reduce from greenhouse gases and transportation. That total amount was about 4.7 by 2030. So of that sort of outstanding obligation, that goal we have to reduce 4.7 million metric tons statewide from transportation, this rulemaking as proposed would achieve 1.5. So we're not solving the total problem. It's not possible for this rule to solve the total problem because it's only getting at one piece, only looking at light duty vehicles, only looking at transportation planning. And there's just a lot more going on in the transportation sector. And in fact, one of the big drivers is electric vehicles. And that's why, unlike a lot of regulations you see, this one actually, the standards go down over time. So if you look out at 2050, we're looking at a 0.7 reduction statewide. That's almost half of the 2030 number, but that's because by 2050, we're assuming that almost all the cars on the road are electric. So when you're reducing travel, you're reducing clean travel, and it's just not having as much of a very little greenhouse gas reduction overall. So that's the complicated table. I'll move you to the next slide. So this is the concept of these mitigation measures. We have a lot more work to do at CDOT to flesh these out. So the draft rule says that we will create a supplemental policy directive by April of next year that will describe what these mitigations measures are, how we quantify the emission reductions. But the rule does list a number of example measures. Like I said, transit and PED, what CDOT can do in terms of, because we're actually a construction agency, what we can do out on project sites, first and last mile. So we're probably will look at creating somewhat of a table that lists all the eligible measures and then some sort of metric to quantify the reductions from those. Couple more slides and then I'll open it up for question. If you go to the next one, with any rule, there has to be enforcement or it's not a rule. So the enforcement proposed here is that if those greenhouse gas reduction levels in that table can't be met, in doing the modeling of the set of projects in the plan, and then looking at the additional mitigation measures, then the enforcement is for the non-MPO areas, so those parts of the state that are outside the 5 MPOs, And for MPOs that do not receive federal sub-allocations from CDOT, we would focus our 10-year plan dollars on projects that reduce greenhouse gas emissions. So that obligation is really on CDOT. In MPO areas that do receive federal sub-allocations, and these are primarily congestion mitigation and air quality dollars and surface treatment block grant, those are the two main ones. The enforcement would be that the MPO needs to use those funds on projects that reduce greenhouse gas emissions, and CDOT would do the same on our end. So that is the proposed quote unquote enforcement. If you go to the next slide, there is an important provision that we recognize there are going to be instances where certain projects need to move forward, primarily for safety reasons. I think that's sort of the biggest example we have in mind. So there's a provision in here where an MPO can go to the Transportation Commission and sort of explain why a certain project in a out of compliance situation needs to move forward. The last slide, a couple more slides. Okay, so the draft rule is out. We released it August 13th for a 60-day comment period. That moves us through October of 15th of October. We have currently 8 hearings. I think we'll have a ninth one in Greeley that we're working on right now. I highlighted there the 2 hearings that are in the Denver metro area. These will be probably from 3 p.m. to 6 p.m. They'll be virtual and in person. But in addition to all those hearings, we are accepting written comment at any time. So there's a lot of opportunities to give CDOT feedback on the rule, and multiple opportunities to do that. You can do it in writing, show up at a hearing, show up virtually. We're working hard to make sure we have Spanish interpretation and translation provided. And then I think that's the last slide. Carson, could you go to the next one? Oh, just to give you a sense where we're headed. So at the end of the 60-day comment period, that's October 15th, we will then take all that we've heard to the Transportation Commission and let them sort of adjudicate on the rule and what they'd like to change. The soonest they could probably adopt a rule would be November 18th. And then we're looking, it takes a couple months with the Administrator's Procedure Act for that to be final. But I think we will see where we're at the end of the comment period. And of course, this decision lies with the Transportation Commission. I will leave it there, Chair. If there's opportunity for questions, I'm happy to take those. And thanks for the time this morning.
Thank you, Rebecca. I appreciate the information. I'm sure we'll have some questions, so we'll go ahead and open it up. It's a lot of information to digest, and it looks like we'll have some time to think about it before the public meetings are local here. All right, let's see the hands. I'm sure somebody has a question. Interesting.
It's a complicated one.
We'll give you another 10 seconds or so. If somebody has a question, you can raise your hand. I don't see any hands, so I'll take that as we need to digest and maybe come back at the September public opportunities for input.
And Chair, I see Chris Chauvin has said, has asked Carson to send out the presentation. So Carson will send that out. He'll post it on the NATA website.
Okay, that'll help. Oh, there's Doug's hand. Good morning, Doug.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you, Rebecca, very much for your presentation. And yeah, we have been at the table and we thank you very much. I know it's a lot of hard work for CDOT staff on this to try to get this rule out the door. So thank you very much. Just for Dr. Cog board members that are on the line, and for any others that would like to listen in, we will be having a couple of our upcoming meetings we will have agenda items associated with this. So our board work session next Wednesday at 4 o'clock, we'll be digging into the rule a little bit more and posing some questions and looking for some direction from the board related to this rule. And then at our September business meeting, the 3rd Wednesday of the month, we'll continue our conversation with this rule. And at that time, might request a position of the board, or at least a direction, or we might extend that into October. But I just wanted to let everybody know that those conversations are ongoing. Next week will be the third meeting in which we'll have a discussion about the rule. So slowly but surely, we're all getting acquainted with it. Thank you very much, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Doug. Appreciate that. All right, I also see that Rebecca put her contact information into the chat here. So if anybody wants to copy that, if you didn't have it, go ahead and look for that in the chat. All right, so the next item on the agenda is the HPTE I-25 Express Lanes. I'm going to just interject really quickly. I do need to leave a little early today. I have another meeting to get to downtown. And before I hand it over to Nick, I wanted to mention that next month's meeting actually has a conflict with the CML conference. So we were wondering, and you guys can weigh in on this or just think about it, maybe email Karen, but we have an option to either cancel next month's meeting or move it to the 30th as an option, since many of us will be at CML next month. So I just wanted to throw that out there. And so with that, we'll go ahead and move on to the HPTE I-25 Express Lanes TIFIA loan conversation with Nick.
Great. Thank you, Chair Sangren. Good morning, everyone. It's been a long time since I've attended one of these meetings, so I appreciate you guys having me, and it's interesting to hear all the progress you guys are making and to see what's going on this corridor. But just briefly, I took a tour of the I-25 North project with Region 4 yesterday. It's amazing what Region 4 is doing up there on the I-25 North project. And I just wanted to talk a little bit about the TIFIA loan. We are, you can go on to the next slide, Carson. We are actually just entering into a TIFIA loan right now, in the process to start entering into a TIFIA loan with the United States Department of Transportation's Build America Bureau. We've done this on US 36 before we handed it over to plenary for that P3 project, and we have a TIFIA loan on the C470 project. So HPD has experience doing TIFIA loans, and we are looking forward to starting this process again with the Build America Bureau. TIFIA loans are extremely advantageous borrowing instruments for the transportation organizations like RTD, CDOT, HPTE, because they allow us to defer interest and payments for the first 5 years of operations, and you also get extremely favorable interest rates. Right now, it's 10-year treasury rates or 30-year treasury rates, excuse me. So right now they're hovering around 1.9%, which is extremely favorable for loans like this for projects. For the I-25 North loan, we are incorporating the entire corridor from segment 2 all the way up to segment 9. We, as you can see here, we are borrowing $154 million for capital expenditures on segments 6, 7, and 8. We are also going to pay back the $24 million we borrowed from Bank of America on segment 3. And our interest rate on that is about 3.58%, and we'll be reducing it to, as I said earlier, around the 1.9% if we close in the next 6 or so months, because I don't see interest rates changing that much in the next year or so. And we're also taking out money to replace the tolling equipment in segments 2 and 3 to improve them. We have a new tolling equipment provider that will allow us to go to fully dynamic pricing in the near future. In terms of, and so we are pledging the revenue from segments 2 and 3 to help the entire corridor get moving. On C470, when we did this on US 36, HPT had to do a level 3 traffic and revenue study that costs upwards of $1.2 million. And it would have taken 2 years, a year and a half to 2 years to do that study. And because we already have 2 operational segments on the corridor, it's essentially acting like a parent guarantee on your first car loan. So, you know, if you remember back in the day when you wanted to buy your first car, but you didn't quite have your credit established, you perhaps got your parents to co-sign for you on a car loan. That is essentially what we're doing here. So segments 2 and 3 are supporting 6, 7, and 8. But when those corridors are operational in 2020, so the project will wrap up in 2024. We'll install tolling equipment in 2024 as well, and we'll probably go live towards the end of 2024, early 2025. Once those corridors are fully operational, but all 6, 7, and 8, I know they're not going to be done at the same time. I know 6 and 8 are going to be done sooner than segment 7. But once they're all done, they're fully operational and tolling. We have 5 years to develop, to get through the ramp up period and develop a user base on 6, 7, and 8. So that gives us, 5 years for those segments to establish revenue and use towards the repayment of the TIFIA loan probably in the year 2029, 2030. In terms of ever having to use segment 2 and 3 revenue is probably low. And if we have to use any, it'll be, I say infinitesimal or pretty small. So that is our plan for the TIFIA. And as projects come online for, say, segment 4, segment 5, improvements on segments 2 and 3, we can use the TIFIA loan and borrow additional funds for improvements on the corridor. We're also not borrowing to the full amount on segment 6, 7, and 8. You can borrow up to 33% of project costs on a corridor. And on 6, 7, and 8, we're only borrowing, I think, in the low 20%, so like around 23% as well. If you can go to the next slide, Carson. So in terms of our schedule, over the last few months, we've received indicative rating of BBB flat for the project, which is extremely good. We got that on C470, but we got it on C470 because there was no HOV component on C470. There is going to be a HOV3 component on I-25 North. So to get a BBB flat rating with an HOV exemption is extremely unheard of and rare across the country. So we feel like the metrics of this corridor are really strong. The credit of the corridor is really strong, I should say. We have gone through the TIFIA credit worthiness review process and are finishing up our TNR study on segments 2 and 3 right now. TIFIA is actually in the process of hiring financial advisors, traffic and revenue advisors, and legal advisors to start the loan negotiation process, which we anticipate to start early October. We will then come to the board and commission to brief the commission and ask the board for approval of the TIFIA loan late winter, early spring of next year. So that is where we are with the TIFIA loan process on I-25. Happy to answer any questions you might have.
This is Joan stepping in for Jessica. Thank you, Nick, for that report, for this report. It's a convoluted and much needed information. I do see that Anita has her hand raised. Anita, if you have a question.
I do have a question very quickly. Does HPTE contemplate a dedicated lane for bus travel in both directions between US 36 and Denver? Is that something that we're shooting for, recognizing there's significant investment required for that?
Are you talking about the reversible express lanes?
Rather than reversible, having dedicated in each direction.
I have not heard of anything like that. Right now, the RTD in the concession agreement we have with Plenary, the buses are allowed to run for free in the express lanes, and they have guaranteed travel time. So if travel times are actually slowing in the express lanes, then Plenary has to take action to improve travel time in those express lanes. I know the the commuting solutions are the former US 36 community solutions, and the US 36 MCC are. I spoke Karen Stewart and I spoke at their meeting a couple months ago, and they expressed support for changing the reversible lanes to bi-directional. HPT looked at that in the express lanes master plan, and if and when that comes to fruition, HPT will be there to help that process move forward.
I guess I would be a voice to encourage it being on the table a little bit sooner. Anyone who uses that corridor recognizes there's a need in both directions at both commute times, but really appreciate this presentation and do want to advocate for that to be on the radar screen.
Thank you, Anita. I see Kent Mormon also has a question. Kent? Kent, are you available to ask your question? We can't hear you, but it looks like you're unmuted.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, there we go. Nick, could you give us a ballpark range of revenue on segments 2 and 3 that you receive a year? You indicate you're not pledged that money to pay the loan. Just curious what the revenue per year is on those segments.
Yeah, I'm just going off the top of my head, Kent. So let me double check, but I think pre-COVID it was almost $7 million a year. And we lost quite a bit, probably about 60% during COVID, but we're now pre-COVID levels on segment 2 already, and segment 3 is doing rather well. Let me get back to you on that, Kent. I don't want to. I know our pre-COVID numbers. I just don't know our post-COVID numbers.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, Julie.
Yeah, I had a quick question, and I guess just kind of curious overall, how does this work in this loan? How is that going to impact the work and the safety concerns that we have on I-25 between 104th and 84th? Because I know previously we talked about how this could play into a possible solution. I'm just kind of curious if you could elaborate on that a little bit for me.
Mm-hmm. So when I know CDOT and the community are working towards a NEPA solution on segment 2 right now. And I think when CDOT and the community can agree on a solution, HPT then can use the TIFIA loan structure that we have now, that we'll have in place, I should say, once we close on the loan to help facilitate those changes.
Okay, thank you. That's helpful.
Thank you, Julie. I see that Anita, you have your hand up. Is this a different question, or are you?
Operator error. I did not take my hand down.
Okay, thank you. And looks like Karen has a question or an update. So Karen.
Hi, Nick. Thanks for coming. Did I just hear you commit money from the TIFIA loan to segment 2 to fix the safety problems?
Yeah, I mean, that'll be the structure of the loan. So it's a corridor-wide loan from US 36 all the way up to Fort Collins. So, we're purposely not using the full extent of the loan, all the way up to 33%. So we're leaving some wiggle room in there for segments 2 and segment 3. When we can get a project identified in that corridor. We're not we're just borrowing what is needed for 6, 7, and 8. We're not taking it all the way up to the 33%. So it leaves us some room there to grow in the future.
Well, that's great news. I'm excited about that. And I see Councilmember Mullica says encouraging news. The next question I have is there's no, it doesn't look like anything on segment 4 and 5 are being considered for this TIFIA loan. As you know, segment 3 ends at Northwest Park E470 right now, and the Highway 7 and I-25 interchange needs to be redone. We need to move those toll lanes up through that project to connect the whole grid. When do you anticipate that happening? The managed lanes system is only as good as how accessible and efficient it is for people to use it. And to be able to get all of those segments done, not only accommodates transit that we're looking for up in this area, also makes it safer, and in essence brings more revenue to HPTE to be able to do more things. So do you have a timeline for segment 4 and 5?
I don't, Karen. I know. I don't. Not at the top of my head. I'm not, familiar as, probably Region 1 would be with the timeline for some. Region 1 or Region 4 would be with the timeline for something like that. I know in our Express Lanes Master Plan we showed those corridors have the I-25 North Corridor was in our Tier 1 group of projects, meaning that they, along with I-25 Central, I think I-25 Central was first in the Tier 1, and I-25 North was the second project in the Tier 1 group, showing that it has great revenue potential and the ability to support any kind of borrowing instrument to help get those projects forward. So, we're happy HPD is happy to help out CDOT when a project is identified on those corridors, on those segments, I should say.
Thanks. I appreciate your answer, and sorry to put you on the spot. You and I have talked about this a lot offline. It's really important to us in the NATA region that the express lanes managed system connect all the way. We have an issue with no transit service up in the northern areas of the High 7 corridor. And one of the issues always is buses get caught in general purpose lanes that are congested. To have those managed lanes in there, to have a ability for the buses to access those managed lanes so that they have travel reliability is really important to us. And we just don't want to lose that message in an opportunity to find funding to finish off segment 4 and 5. And it's complicated. I understand that. I don't want you to lose the message that we want that. That's part of NATA's priority list, is getting those managed lanes completed to Highway 7. Thanks for coming, Nick. Sorry to put you on the spot. You and I have lots of talks about this, and I really appreciate you giving the information to NATA today.
It was a pleasure to be here.
Thank you, Nick, and I echo strongly what all of the comments that were made, especially about the managed lanes along I-25. So I'm sure we'll be hearing more from you in the future.
Yeah,
I don't see any other hands up. Are there any more questions really fast for Nick? I don't see any. So with that, we'll be moving on to the RTD reimagining briefing and feedback from Julie Skeen.
Terrific. Thank you so much. We really appreciate the opportunity to come and talk to you a little bit about Reimagine RTD. Have a very brief presentation, and then we'll certainly open it up to any questions that you might have. So we'll just jump right in. Carson, next slide. So just as a reminder, I know it's been a little bit since we've had a chance to talk to you guys about this. There are two major components of Reimagine RTD. Short-term focus with the systems optimization plan, and then a longer-term focus with the mobility plan for the future. So for the systems optimization plan, that is the short-term redesign of RTD's system, really with the goal of balancing the mobility needs of the region with fiscal limitations. So this is something, as you guys know, we rolled up our sleeves and we got into a lot of details in early 2019, and we were pulling all this wonderful information together, had all these great baseline documents that really started formulating some ideas, and then COVID hit. So, and COVID is really, as you know, from a transit perspective, sort of turned everything upside down on its head. So the good news is all of that technical work we did exist, and there are still components of it that are going to be very important and very useful to RTD as they move forward with determining how to rebuild service as we get hopefully beyond the COVID sort of situation. So what we've done is we had to pivot. We had to recognize that with the world sort of changing, we need to recognize that and gear our technical analyses to really be something that is useful for RTD in the region. So what we have done is we have established a rebuilding service working group, which is sort of a subset of everything we're doing with the Reimagine. We've had 2 meetings already. Our next meeting is in October. And this group is really working on saying, okay, what is the information that we were able to pull from Reimagine? Now let's sit down directly with the service development group and work together in concert to determine what are the performance measures, the metrics, the indicators, the milestones. What is it that RTD needs to be really considering as they're moving forward with rebuilding service? So I'll throw that out to you because if you are interested in doing a deeper dive into this, we would love to have you join our working group meeting. So feel free to put your name in the chat or your contact information in the chat. If you'd like to see be included on that next meeting appointment in October, we'd love to have you join us. Next slide, please. So building a little bit on this concept of where to rebuild service, just wanted to highlight a couple of items. This is feedback and direction we've received from senior management at RTD, just to help us frame things as we're moving forward and talking about, where the best way and how to rebuild service for the agency. So a few things that have changed, really aligning RTD service with workforce needs. So what this means is no more mandating. So recognizing that we have to make sure that we're working and assigning service in a way that is manageable and we can handle it with the existing staff we need. And as you know, RTD has been very focused on the workforce issue, very focused on recruiting and retention around their operators. Equity being a priority. We recognize there's some people that really need this service and that have been riding the service all through COVID. Making sure that those are taken care of, and really, as you heard from Deborah Wagner this morning, or Deborah Johnson this morning, that it's Title VI. We've really got to make sure we have federal requirements around Title VI that have to factor in. There is some financial uncertainty. I know this group has talked to RTD a little bit. As of right now, based on with the stimulus funding and the situation with Farebox, that right now they're projecting that service can be rebuilt up to about 85% of what it was pre-COVID levels. So that's a target that we're looking at as we're identifying, again, how to rebuild service from here. Next slide, please. A couple of other real quick items, making sure that, we're really watching the situation on the ground, really watching where ridership is coming back and recognizing that the big unknown, or one of the biggest unknowns right now, is telework. What is happening with telework? Are we going to shift back to our old travel patterns, or does it end up being some sort of hybrid? So moving forward. And then finally, just sort of a recognition that because there wasn't a route that existed in the system pre-COVID does not necessarily mean that it's going to be reinstated, given some of the financial constraints and the process that the group is working through. So next slide, please. So just very quickly, guiding principles. So these were adopted formally by the RTD Board of Directors in April, and they also are guiding the rebuilding service subgroup. And hopefully you've seen these before, but they also are acting as the foundation for the piece I'd like to talk about just very quickly now, is the mobility plan for the future. So that's RTD's long-term strategic plan for the organization. Next slide, please. So what the mobility plan for the future is dealing with is recognizing that the industry's changed. There's a lot of challenges going on, whether it be workforce, there's a lot of opportunities in terms of partnership and new technologies, and the reality that this area is growing dramatically and that there will be a growing need for transit services in the future. What I think is really great about the approach we're taking with the mobility plan for the future is we're not guessing what the future is, because we will be wrong. So what we're doing is we're working with our committees and our working groups and getting feedback from the public on what are those key drivers? What are those scenarios? What is sort of the universe of future realities that could happen to RTD? So looking at a range of scenarios that could happen in the future, and then identifying tactics and strategies to ensure that RTD is nimble and flexible and able to address those changing needs as much as possible. Next slide, please. So part of what we're doing, and just as a reminder, I won't go into all the detail on this, but it's really when we think about Reimagine RTD, what we have been tasked to do is put that customer right in the center. So focusing on that customer experience and then developing those tactics, those strategies, those ideas to make sure that RTD can address the future realities of the transit network and the transit needs in the region. Next slide, please. So we're excited. We would love to come back to you after October. So what we've been working on is developing these sort of key driving forces for things that really could impact the nature of the business and the transit needs in the future. And then we are running them through a model. It's called EMAT, and it is an EMAT model, which is a separate model, but it works very closely with the travel demand model. And so what we're going to have in October is some results of this modeling effort to sort of say, okay, if these are the scenarios that we see moving in the future, what does that mean in terms of on the ground impacts to the transit system and to RTD? So, you know, a range, for example, of teleworking scenarios, everything from people just stay working at home to everybody goes back downtown. Let's look at what that means from a ridership perspective, from a funding perspective, from a needs perspective, from travel demand. And so we're very excited, would love the opportunity to come back and talk to you a little bit more once we have a little bit more of this modeling effort done in that October timeframe. Last couple slides, and then I'll open it up. I know I've gone through this fast, but I want to be respectful of your time. Public engagement, you know, really what we've been focusing on with the last couple months are meetings like this. We've been meetings with the TMOs and the TMAs and the Citizens Advisory Committee and local governments, really around identifying strategies. So you saw those guiding principles, really starting to get ideas from different organizations, especially that work closely with RTD, to say, okay, what should we be thinking about? What should be our priorities and strategically as we move forward from a long-term perspective? You are going to hear a lot more of us hear a lot more from us in the winter timeframe. That's really going to be our big push. We are going to have the results of the EMAT modeling. We're going to start putting draft recommendations and strategies out there. And so you're going to see a lot more. We've got a whole series of public meetings. We've got telephone town halls, you know, and we will continue doing these individual meetings. For example, we would love to come back and talk to this group as well. So with that, the last slide is just sort of our upcoming meetings. I did see Joan. We'd love to have you join the Rebuilding Service Subgroup. We're excited. Anybody else that would like to join us? That has been set. It will be on October 18th. We just set that yesterday. And then we've got our next round of technical and advisory committee meetings. And we're very excited to do a study session with the RTD Board of Directors on, actually it's September 21st. That just got pushed out a week. So with that, I know I went through a lot quickly, and I know we don't have a whole lot of time left, so I will hand it back to you, and then you can ask us any questions that you have. We also have Christina Zazueta on the phone, so she can help me answer any questions, even if it's broader than Reimagine RTD.
Thank you, Julie. Your passion for this certainly shows through. Thank you for the input. Do we have any questions for Julie? I don't see any. Don't forget to put your contact info in chat for her if you're interested.
Great.
And with that, just as a reminder that we cannot tell you when the next meeting will be since it's a conflict with CML. So let us know through email whether or not you think that meeting should be canceled. Are there any other questions or any input from anyone?
Thanks, Chair. Wanted to let you know that we have upcoming, I don't see it on the screen, but we have identified several things for upcoming meetings. Front Range Passenger Rail Special District Overview is probably a good one to have, either if we have a September meeting or then in October. We'll look to the Federal Infrastructure Legislative Update again. It's time for jurisdictions of NATA to offer NATA priority projects list updates. And we probably in October want to talk about CDOT's 10-year plan update. CDOT's going to start developing years 4 through 8, and we'd like to have an update on that. Advancing Adams update is probably appropriate for October. And then Kent Mormon reminded me that tip call for projects will be coming up, and that might be a good time to have a NATA discussion about possible support for TIP projects. So got a lot to do. Remind you, we do not have a meeting in November. So if we cancel the September meeting, we would just have 2 more meetings this year. If we change the September meeting to the 30th, that will give us 3 more meetings this year. So we always serve at the pleasure of NATA. Just tell us what you want us to do and we'll get it done.
Thank you, Karen. It sounds like we have a full agenda for the rest of the year, and they're all really important for this region. So do we have any other comments before we close out the meeting? If not, thank you. We're ending a couple of minutes early, and we'll see you hopefully in September, but if not, in October. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Goodbye.